Okay, Tony, away you go. Anything else you need? No? You're right?
No. Probably need some ice cubes later.
You're too hot, are you? Move it along.
No, that's okay. It's
You
fine.
can stick it in the corridor part and you'll get a breeze. It's cooler out there.
Okay. All right then. Okay, so I'll make a start, and I guess you know that my talk tonight was going to be a journey with apparitions. Now, it's only going to be a fairly short one because it was only today that I actually got out of my sick bed and started writing anything. Because I've been a bit crook with the flu, like you were saying you had the other week. When I first thought of this topic, I originally came up with the presentation title, Walking with Ghosts. And I then decided that copyright laws, etc., and my lack of originality, those walking with dinosaurs, walking with that type of thing, suggested that it would be best to try to disguise my blatant plagiarism by changing the name to Journey.
Do you need more light,
Journeys,
Tony?
Apparitions.
Do you
Sorry.
need more light?
No, that's okay.
Except like ghosts can't walk, but floats.
Yeah. So after yet more thought, I realised that my title was probably more encompassing than the original title anyway, because apparitions are more than just ghosts. And I hope to explain that a little more as we progress through the talk. So the topic briefly touches on my past public lecture, Chronicles of a Part-Time Psychic, in which I mentioned a particularly unusual event. And whilst walking with my friend into a shop, I noticed his girlfriend, her sister and her mother, each dressed in black, looking mournful and similarly walking towards us in slow motion. Now, I immediately caught up with my friend and asked him why he hadn't acknowledged his girlfriend. And we both then quickly exited the shop, and looking both ways up and down the road, saw nothing in the 150 metres there on either side of us. So they hadn't actually been there. But it wasn't until I learnt the next day that his girlfriend's father had passed away at roughly the same time that I'd actually seen this, what I would call apparition. And so what I believe I was actually seeing, or in my conclusion, was that what I had seen was not ghosts, as the people I saw were alive, but apparitions of an event from a different moment in time. Suggesting that occasionally we can glimpse a snippet of a time, past, present and future. So has anyone got any ideas or thoughts about that?
Well, I've fairly recently read a book about these kind of events, and to me it seems that some people perhaps are more susceptible to receiving these kind of revelations, or whatever you want to call them, but they do in fact happen, because a lot of examples were cited in the book, exactly the way you said. You can momentarily see people who aren't there, but it doesn't mean that something's happened to them. It's something that happens in association with them. Yeah.
And like the incident that I saw, it was only momentarily. It was while I was actually walking to the shop, and it was one of those places. I'm just trying to remember what the place looked like. It's since been pulled down in another building.
Yeah.
Built
Did
up
your
with
friend
flats.
see it too?
No, he didn't.
Only you.
And it was only me that had seen it.
That's
and,
what usually happens.
And what had happened was that we were standing side by side, walking towards the building. The building's on our right, and we're walking into it, and there's a column. And he's walked around the column, and I've just started to walk around the column and seen them like that. And it's not as if there's a wall there was just that column. And so and then we actually walk into the building, which is about another metre away. And I've called him back before we've actually got into the building, and we've come back to where that column is and looked around, and there was nothing there. And but from my memory, it was definitely them. They were there. I could see them physically, and I've never been able to do that ever since. And again, this
but
goes.
You don't do it.
No,
It's happening.
that's right. This goes back to about 1979, 1980. So it's the only time I've ever experienced something like that. I have experienced a lot of other different things. A lot of things I don't remember, a lot of things I choose not to remember. But still, nonetheless, it was one of those things. So, one of the other things, frightening horror movies, okay, will have us believe that those in the afterlife are vengeful and can harm us. Now, as much as I tend to find such suggestions amusing, I was awoken late one evening at around 1 a.m, 2 a.m, somewhere around there, by a deep voice telling me to get out, get out, get out, type of thing. And then these words were accompanied by the feeling of my bed being violently shaken. Now, I remember thinking that this was no one that I knew trying to play tricks on me, and I was petrified to take a look from under the covers. The louder the voice and the more violent the shaking of my bed, the more my knuckles turned white as I was holding the covers of my bed over my head. Now, eventually these terrifying sensations stopped, and I finally fell back to sleep. I was awoken by my mother a couple of hours later, who was making sure that I didn't sleep through the alarm so that I could get up to work. And she asked me, well, what's happened? Why are your bedclothes all over the floor? Because as I opened my eyes and had a look, I could see that they were all strewn around the room, around the bed, as if they'd been thrown off the bed by some kind of centrifugal force in every direction. In every direction. So that's another one that happened. So
Poltergeist.
I wouldn't have a clue.
That would be a poltergeist, wouldn't it?
Maybe so, but I know it scared the absolute Jesus out of me.
Because
Quite frightening. I've never really believed in. Well, one of the reasons why I enjoy horror movies is because I don't believe that they're real, and don't believe that they can be real. This was one instance where I saw something that I'd seen and believed was quite frightening and quite real.
How old were you at the time?
Well, I was in the Air Force at the time, so I was probably about 22.
Yeah, okay.
Around
Right.
that.
Because my understanding, a lot of poltergeists tend to be an emotional projection from a teenager.
Yeah, yeah.
So it seems to me to be more likely to be some other sort of entity rather than a poltergeist.
Yeah. Mind you, I never experienced it in that room ever again either. Whether it just wanted to shake me up that one time or what, I don't know. And for what reason, I don't know. Just one of those...
Could be some kind of Air Force experiment that they conducted in the paranormal.
maybe so.
You're a test subject.
Maybe so. But, yeah. The other one was when Sharon and I went to Tasmania, and it was in the November before the Port Arthur massacre. So it was, when did that happen? It happened about April or something, you know, I can't remember offhand, but it was only about, I think it was only about 4 or 5 months after we'd been there that Port Arthur happened, the massacre happened. But while we were there, we visited Port Arthur and booked ourselves in for the ghost tour, as most people did when they went down there. I don't even know if they do them these days because of what happened down there. But I experienced a few strange events then. During the afternoon before the ghost tour, Sharon and I just walked around the place and got a feel for what it was like and had a look at the prison cells and all these different things that you could see during daylight. And while we were there, I had the strangest feeling of being watched by someone as we inspected the prison cells in particular. Now, afterwards, we made our way around to the remains of the church, and I heard noises from the car park. And I looked over and I could hear a rifle being discharged again and again, and saw a rifleman approach a bus. Now, I came back to reality as Sharon asked me a question about the remains of the church, and looking back at the car park, I saw only our vehicle there. So in hindsight, I can only suggest that what I glimpsed was that horrible thing that happened a few months later, that maybe this was one of those glimpses into the future that I'd seen with that other thing.
Yeah.
Maybe this was the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that, because it only happens in your head, no one else witnesses it, you're certainly not going to report it to anyone, are you? And say, listen, I think something terrible is going to happen.
Have you?
Well, that's right. You've got no way of saying, well, I know who it is, I saw the bloke on him. I mean, all I could see someone with a rifle, and he was down in a bus, and it was probably about a good
Precognition, that's called.
maybe so.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those ones where, you know, had I not been snapped back to reality, I might have seen a little bit more of it as well and understood it a bit more. I don't know. But I didn't get that far.
Did you say anything at the time to your wife, or not? Or did you just sort of...
I talked to her about a few of the things that I was experiencing there, and that was one of them. I don't know if she remembers it now, but I did.
I just remember when I went down there, I didn't experience anything like that, but I could feel, when I went in the cell parts, I could feel presence of different beings.
And they were very small cells too, weren't they?
Oh,
it was like a bathtub almost.
yeah, very tiny, but double bricked.
Yeah.
Oh, so secure.
Yeah.
Yes. But I did feel the presence of beings there, and it was quite oppressive.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a jail.
Yeah.
The Port Arthur jail for
The
the place got massacred and all the people.
Yeah.
But I
It was where
remember-
the convicts were sent in the very early days.
And it was a very
Very dark place.
bad living conditions.
Oh, shocking.
Okay.
But I remember feeling a real kind of empathy or sympathy, or it was something anyway that like it was like an understanding of the terrible conditions that they must have lived under. It struck me very forcibly.
I picked up a stone, but I couldn't hold the stone. I had to let it go. I just sort of felt like there's so much sadness and so much
Yes. Yeah.
the emotional trauma, the vibrations are still there.
Yeah.
And I just sort of sensed the young lad that did the massacre later on, who apparently was a little bit mentally unbalanced to start off with. He was probably just a victim because he was vulnerable to that. There's a darker presence there. And so he just lost it because he was really probably under there.
I think he had other issues too, didn't he?
Yes, he already had some sort of problems before he went there.
There's all Port Arthur's probably like on the ley line of fault in the earth that's more susceptible to psychic ability.
No, it's not that so much. When there's human torture and degradation in any of these sort of places, it leaves its mark on the area for a long time. And you have it, Port Arthur is a good example. There's another island off Tasmania. Maria Island, yes. I've never been there, but I remember my sister-in-law told me that it's worse than Port Arthur.
Then again, I don't know what could be much worse than being one of the prisoners sent to the small island that's just off Port Arthur, which is the one where they bury their dead, and they have to dig the graves themselves, and then, you know, if they're unfortunate enough, jump in the hole.
And there's 6. That was 6 deep on that island,
Yeah.
dead, weren't they?
Yeah. It was, okay. The other experience I had while I was at Port Arthur was during the ghost tour that evening. You know, we had just viewed the governor's mansion and were walking through a long avenue of trees that lined both sides of the road, I think, and I saw feet dangling from several of the trees.
You saw
I could
what?
actually see the feet dangling from the trees.
Really?
And as our tourist group passed by, and I saw some wretches drop and dangle some 3 metres above the ground as well. So I was actually witnessing a hanging as well, but the kind of the feeling, like you were saying, was so oppressive in that there that perhaps these things are just all part of what you're going to experience anyway. There were some other parts of the place. I don't know if you've ever seen, I think there's one part, the doctor's cottage or something like that, where it was where the mortuary was. You know, you go down there and just because, well, everyone's got to pass through there anyway at some stage. But perhaps not as frightening as some of the other places, because the other places were intentional pain and suffering, which perhaps if you end up in the morgue, it's not intentional pain anyway, is it? So a bit of a difference there. So the next thing I thought I might mention was the Victorian era. It was a time in history when science began exerting itself and at the same time trying to legitimise its existence. One of its more spectacular claims was that it had uncovered the existence of the soul, and that this was proven at the weight loss experienced by the newly deceased immediately after they had died. Now, rather dubious experiments on the dying and the dead, which consisted of sophisticated weighing devices that would weigh the person just prior to death and almost immediately afterwards, resulted in the finding that there was a loss of something like 21 ounces when the person had expired. Now, this 21 ounces then became the proof that the soul weighed 21 ounces. A completely unscrupulous control group was arranged of dogs being weighed and then euthanised and then immediately being weighed again. Now, there was no discernible difference. Now, this was consistent with the belief at the time that dogs didn't have souls, and thus proved that the difference found in the bed weights proved the existence of the souls in humans. Quite funny. Abhorrent, absolutely abhorrent, but anyway. That they actually chose to euthanize all these dogs to prove their theory that the soul existed, because they'd done these experiments that said they weighed 21 ounces less or something after.
Yeah, that's a good idea for an experiment I could do. I wanted my number of experiments I could do.
Who are you going to euthanize?
Bad people.
The problem with that is, how do you determine who are the bad people?
Criminals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but you
Who
can't.
determines who a criminal is?
Yeah.
There's criminals and criminals.
Yeah, and it's judging, and we're not allowed to judge.
That's the
We
thing.
don't know other people's beliefs and motivations and dispositions and all those things.
Right.
Intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
But like on people on death row, they sign their life away for experiments.
I think I saw that in one of the Doctor Who episodes one time, where the fellow was put on this machine where they did exactly that, where it it removed his bad and evil thoughts and it stored them in this machine, and the machine was then had then become
Evil.
yeah. And what it was the master behind it. So you should probably remember that one.
Sort of rings a bell.
I think that was John Pertwee's year.
Oh, right.
Oh, that's a long time ago.
Yes, it is.
He was one of the early ones, wasn't he? It's a long
Number
time.
3, I
It's
think
about
he was.
3
Yeah,
or 4.
yeah.
3 or 4.
Yeah, 3. Alright, so the psychological impact of a loved one's passing, this is another point, can in many instances create the atmosphere required for events to occur. Whether these events are real or not is open to interpretation. Now, many people have claimed that after a loved one dies, particularly a partner, the surviving member of the couple will wake and hear the partner breathing next to them, or will be woken by their partner calling their name. Now, is this simply wishful thinking, or is this evidence of contact? One of the difficulties associated with all such events is that they are not recordable in a physical sense, and as such cannot be scientifically proven. That's not to say that they're not real, just that science cannot say one way or the other. So, any comments on that?
Well, when my father died, my mother moved out of the house about 3 months later. I was only 2 at the time, and she said she could hear him and feel his presence in the house all the time.
And she didn't feel comforted?
She never ever said she heard him talking to her, but she said it was like he was there all the time. But it was probably her loss too.
But she moved out because...
Because of that.
So
she
she
couldn't
wasn't
stay
comforted
there.
by
She couldn't stay
When my father died, Mum was out one night with some friends. They'd taken her out, and she said she could feel his hand on her arm. But whether that was just...
You don't know whether it's wishful thinking or not, do you?
Oh,
Who's to say they've not actually made contact?
yes.
It's one of those things that until you yourself go through something, you can't say. Can you?
Unless they do experiments in that, like do all the scientific experiments or photographies or photographing spirits, so that they can prove it.
But what about some of the stories you hear, and they have happened about, there has been some kind of disturbance, and when people have actually taken action, I'm not saying evasive action, but some kind of action that they feel or they sense is required of them, they do it and it doesn't happen anymore. There's recorded cases of that as well.
There was a movie just recently, what's it called? It was the English actor Ricky Gervais, who was in The Office, etc. I don't like him all that much as a comedian, but I do like The Office anyway.
The City, what was it called?
City of Ghosts?
City of Ghosts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the actual premise of the story was he was a dentist in New York, and he has to have an operation, and while under the anaesthetic, something goes wrong, doesn't it? And he nearly dies. And when he comes back to life again, he sees the departed. And when they start to realise he can see them, they start pestering him, because in each case there are ghosts who have died suddenly or died under circumstances where they have an unfinished business. So they want him to finish the business for them.
Yeah.
And it's quite fun. It's a very funny movie, but it's quite poignant too, because at first he's fighting it. He doesn't want anything to do with them.
Yeah.
But they realise he can see them, so they sort of chase him all the time. And eventually he's an absolute obnoxious character He's so self-centered, isn't he?
Mm.
And he goes through this process where he has to actually come to terms with his own disposition.
Yeah,
And in the process, he changes,
yeah.
and he helps all these ghosts. And as he does, they're free. They go to the light, so to speak.
They see that if people die suddenly, for example, like in a car accident, they can sort of wander around in a sort of non-body sense for quite a period of time, not realising they've been killed.
Yes.
They're dead, but they don't realise they're dead.
Yes, that's one of the good jobs that's done within the spiritualist movement, is that they
Yes.
focus on trying to help the departed
That's right, yeah.
depart.
Yes, yeah.
Years ago, one of the TS conventions, one of our members had a tape recording, back in the days when there was tapes, little tapes, and it was of a program that was on the ABC radio, but it was made by a BBC crew, and this film crew had gone to an army base outside of London somewhere, where there was reported hauntings and paranormal events, and one of the places that was focused on was the squash courts, and strange things kept happening in the courts. So they set up the equipment and they locked everything. There was nobody inside, and got the equipment running. And the next day when they played it back, there was a definite plane crash noise on the tape, and then there was things happened, and there were footsteps walking into the squash courts. So they looked back into the history, and there was, in the Second World War, one of the planes coming back had crashed on landing and killed everybody in it, the crew. And this particular crew had made a pact before they left that they would meet they'd have a game of squash after the foray, so to speak, so that their souls were all coming back into the squash courts. And they conducted a seance and talked. These men did not know they were dead, and they seemed like they were trapped in some sort of time warp, where they just kept going round and round and round.
Fancied having going through the crash all those times.
And a voice came through one of the people conducting the seance, and it was the saddest voice. It was really... It didn't give you the shivers in a frightening way, but it gave you the shivers because it was sad. And so they conducted this process, and they sort of let them know they were dead, let go to the light or whatever.
Yeah.
And after that, they never had any problems in the
space court. Yeah.
But it was interesting because it was, as you say, they didn't know they were dead.
Because they would have had to go through that experience.
Yes.
Well, if it was the Second World War, hundreds of times.
Yes. I mean, there must be many cases like that in times of war where there's deaths occurred so ferociously. Or with, 9/11, I think that, I understand that there was a lot of people focused on the inner planes after 9/11 to try and help those souls, because a lot of people died in such instant. There wasn't even any time to be aware they were dying, was there? It was just explosion after explosion. So there's a lot about life we don't understand.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I read in this book, it said, we're surrounded by many mysteries, and things remain a mystery until the mystery is unravelled.
Yes.
It's not a mystery anymore after that, but sometimes there has to be a process to investigate and somehow clarify and be able to explain. And once it's understood, then the problem can go away.
But in a way, like I do have logical explanations behind things. Like we all have like a spirit in us, and if that spirit lingers after the body, like if there's no, say for example, there's no heaven or hell, that's a man-made concept. If it's just a spirit that's just floating around with no soulful, no consciousness, it's just dead, but like there's a kind of resonance and that just lingers around. And it's how people perceive that. If it's in the genes, they don't know all that much about the genes, or it could be like a neurological thing. Because that's the thing, like if there's an actual gene to see spirits and that.
I don't think that's to do with the genes. The genes
No,
are a
I don't.
physical thing.
Well, yes. But I think we're all gifted in
To
different
be
ways.
perceptive.
And we're all aware of things in different ways, and obviously Tony has a kind of drift in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, spiritual intelligence.
Mm.
Yes.
On that note, anyway, I'll just carry on a little bit. I'll carry on. Prior to the Newcastle earthquake, I attended the Spiritualist Church in King Street, Newcastle. Not the other one, there was two of them.
There are, yeah.
Now, on my first visit there, I was somewhat apprehensive and about letting go, and as such, when the group president went into the meditation room, I did not close my eyes and watched what was going on around the room as the meditation progressed. And the room was lit in a blue light to aid meditation. Now, looking around the room, I noticed a strange fluorescent green object as it approached the man opposite me. Now, it entered his right nostril, and immediately he began talking about a life lived something like 60 or 70 years ago. Once he'd finished, I noticed that the fluorescent light left his left nostril and then progressed along the line to about a third person along toward this woman, and became like a chain around her neck. Now, she immediately started talking about a friend of hers who had recently passed away, and that she was afraid, didn't want to get let go of life, and she felt as if there was a chain around her neck. Now, that to me kind of linked the two together. We'll link that experience with the reality of it for me, and making me believe that what I'd seen was real, that I'd seen a chain, and the woman was saying about the woman being like a chain around her neck. In that group, it was talked about how to get that person to then move on and that type of thing. And that happened, but in the process I saw this green thing change form several times around the group and go to different people as they spoke and that type of thing. So that was another form of apparition which I never even knew existed before. And it was something that I actually saw in the form of this blob type thing that just moved from one person to another. In one instance it went up the person's nose, like I said, the first person, and out the other side of their nostril, and then over to the other person, and formed a chain around their neck, and someone else who did something else, and around the group process.
The fact that the person who was the friend of the lady with the whatever it was around her neck, could that be indicative of the fact that her friend didn't break that etheric thread yet?
Well, not necessarily the etheric thread, but it said that, well, my understanding is probably 90% of us, when we die, we move.
Because it should break, shouldn't it?
But some people get caught and don't move on when they should.
Yes.
And it can be a number of reasons, and one is sudden death or death under terrible circumstances, like murder or whatever.
But she just didn't want to die.
Yes, but there's cases where people are so earthbound themselves, they're so, if they cling, like say if a wealthy person is so clinging to his money,
yes,
the soul may find it hard to move on because they're still attached to the physical, social situation. Or it said that if you have, say, a case where a child dies and the mother is so forlorn and can't let go of her own desire for the child, it holds the child back, or a husband or a lover or whatever.
Yeah.
So that it is good when someone dies that's close to you to let them go.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you earthbound them for a while. In other cases, if people commit suicide, depending on why they commit suicide, it can earthbound. So there's lots of different reasons why they get caught. And we probably don't understand the implications of it very much at all, but probably to me every case is its own situation too.
It's an individual case,
You
yeah.
can't sit in judgment of.
Yeah.
My own mum took her own life in an emotionally unstable state. Then about 2 or 3 months before she died, my sister's partner at the time, who had a very bad accident and was paraplegic, took his own life. And one of the interesting things that happened was Mum died in her car, and the car was parked in the house. She bought the house opposite the family house. The car was parked in the garage, and up on the floor above it, my sister had brought up all her things, including the chair in which Steve had died in, and that was literally above the car. That we were there in the house trying to put all the belongings together and get rid of things, and my nephew, who was about 10 at the time, came down and said, "Steve's down there." We walked down into the lounge room, and it was like walking into a refrigerator. It was so cold. And I've got a logical mind. I just walked in and out, and I walked in and out, and I walked in and out, trying to work out what was I experiencing.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, you said before, you can't explain these things, but you've got to experience it. But I couldn't see as far as ghost or spirit was concerned. It was only the little boy that saw anyone.
Yeah.
But we felt his presence. And the sort of sense that because both deaths were very sad deaths, there must have been some sort of vortex or time loop or connection between the chair and the car that opened the doorway. It's like a rent in time space or something like that. I remember just saying, right, we've got to tell Steve to move on.
Yes.
I don't know enough about
Yes.
conducting anything in that sort of sense, but that's all my thought forms was let go.
Okay.
Mum, probably about a couple of years later, because I was a little bit concerned because I'm aware that suicides can be tracked for a long time afterwards, to your natural time, a lot of times. But I had this, one time I had this dream, it was Mother's Day, funnily enough, and in my dream I saw my mother, and we went shopping in a market, and then all of a sudden she said to me, "I've got to go now," and she just walked out through these gates. And I thought, I woke up thinking Mum's gone. And it was happy. She hadn't been as some sort of full-on ghost wandering around or anything. Wherever she'd been caught, she'd been just suspended, I think. And that's my interpretation, that she had worked at her a lot of time and she was moved on. But funny enough, about 3 months ago, I had a dream about her. And my sister had a dream the same night.
About your mum?
Yeah.
Maybe she's trying to tell you something.
I don't know, it was a happy dream. I just remember Mum being happy, so it wasn't...
Well, my mother's experiencing her mother, and they had a very bad relationship. And she's at the moment having all these dreams about her mother, and she's getting quite agitated about it. What do you do in a case like that?
Don't know.
Yes, it's hard to...
Is her mother dead?
Oh, my mum's 87,
Yes.
so her mum's very dead.
Did your mother's sister, was she a spiritual or religious person?
My grandmother.
Yeah, her mother, yeah, that's right, yeah. See,
no.
she wasn't. There might be something you need to investigate about her life that you need to do that lets her go.
It's really interesting because I think she was quite an abusive lady. I think towards my mother and towards me. So yeah, I don't know how you investigate that.
Yes.
Or there just might be, you might need to have to tell her that she's forgiven or something.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And send a love of some sort.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And it's sometimes hard if your mother has a bad memory.
Yeah,
Very
that's right.
resentful, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she
Maybe
might
she's
need
got to
to,
let go of that resentment somehow.
Yeah,
and
she
that's
might
a hard
need-
thing to do.
yeah, she
Yes.
might need to, but the grandmother might need to be told, Jill's grandmother,
To be
that she's forgiven.
Mm.
Yeah, you never, well, I
Yes.
don't know
And
if
it
that's
might,
any help.
it might be right too.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
yeah. Just get someone or even a psychic or somebody who does counselling or whatever to sort of with you together, or you can get these people to come to the house too, and just ask them to communicate with that soul and just say, look, you know, we're here to let you know that the past is past and we're forgiven. It might work, it might not. Yeah.
And it may not be the grandmother, it might be just the mother's.
There may be some resentment still residing
Yes,
in the
her
mum.
residual
Yeah,
she's
huge,
got creating
huge.
thirst forms.
And I
Well,
mean,
they
there's a bit
might
of
need to
dementia.
forgive each other.
Yeah.
And there's some dementia there now too.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
And she's
yeah,
got to
I
get closer to
understand.
her letting go of life. And she's-
Yes,
well at
yes.
87. But I mean, I've been to a psychic who says that my mother's the most determined person in the world, and she's going to live for another 12 years.
Yeah. I was going to say about that, you mentioned about suicide. In the house where my father died, the family had lived there for years and years. It was in Randwick, and my father and my uncle lived there after the mother and father, my grandmother and grandfather died. And it was then after that my father, who was a friend of my mother's family, proposed to my mother, and that's when they got married. My mum and dad lived in that house, but uncle still lived there, my father's brother. But my grandmother died, I don't know of what, but I think she might have been in her 50s or late 50s. And about a year or so after that, grandfather committed suicide in the bathroom. You know the old shower things where they went up and right angled, and then the shower was like a big plate,
No,
and it came down in the
straight
middle
down.
of the bathtub. He used that to hang himself.
Mm.
So maybe there was something there from my grandfather that caused my mother not to want to live in that house anymore. I don't know.
But a lot of suicides,
Because my mum and they
a
were
lot of
quite-
suicides not based on like emotional term. Like my girlfriend tried to commit suicide a couple of weeks ago, and she wasn't going through any life problems or that. It was just based on medications. But she's okay now.
Well,
But
that's-
these things happen.
Yes, suicide, we can't ever sit too much in judgment because we don't know what's going through a person's mind or through their heart at that moment.
He just couldn't live without her.
Yes, I mean,
He
sometimes
fretted
it's
so
an,
much.
it's an emotional
Yeah,
response. Sometimes it's, I mean, with my mum, it was going through a bad menopausal process which caused a mental, psychological breakdown, and she was put into hospital at one stage and given that terrible thing they used to do.
Oh, not the electric shock.
Yes, electric shock.
treatment.
And it was after having the electric shock that she deteriorated.
Yeah, some
So I
people.
also felt that
Some
there was
people do.
damage done
Yeah.
at a superphysical
Yeah, it can
level.
have quite a remarkable curative effect for some people, but for other people it can be. I've seen it done.
Yes,
It's a horrible thing.
yes,
It is
Very
really.
violent, isn't it?
yes.
It is.
And at the time Mum had the treatment, we didn't understand what the real treatment was. We were sort of told by the doctors they were going to do this treatment.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about a couple of years later I was in England and I went to see the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I remember walking out thinking, oh hell, Mum, what have we allowed to go through?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that was probably exaggerated or not exaggerated, it was
Overacted.
yeah, but it was, nevertheless, it was a reflection of how those treatments can go so wrong.
They can.
It was banned.
And those lobectomies are terrible.
Yes.
Taking off part of the front section of their brain
Yes.
altogether.
Yes, and there's other times when people commit suicide because some sort of entity or some sort of something outside them grabs them at a weaker moment.
Yes, that's right.
But it leads to like a negative, like aura, or if people like interact with that aura, it makes them feel bad.
Well, you
yes.
don't have to do anything in particular, just talk to your mum
Yes.
in a way that says, really, you should forgive each other now.
Yeah.
It might be as simple as that.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Mm.
And maybe if she's got a little bit of dementia and she can't do it too much, if you...
In minimal dimension.
Yeah, you can do it
You
for
probably
her.
could do a lot just by sending your own thought forms.
Yeah, that's right.
Sort of
Yes.
frame it.
Sometimes we tend to make too much of a complication that a genuine sentiment can overcome anyway, because that's the reality, and it's so serious it's really meant.
But with my mother, she is fixated on, she brings out these same stories all the time.
But that's
And
a factor in dementia anyway.
I suppose it is.
It is, yeah.
So she really is probably going down that
Oh,
path.
well, if she's been...
she can still see her mother looking at her, and she knew what her mother was thinking. And I said, but
she didn't
you
know.
don't know what anybody
She
else
was
is
making-
thinking.
she was
and you're
making
projecting your own
assumptions, yeah.
stuff on. And things like that. And there were genuine reasons for her to feel this way too.
Yes, it was real to her.
Oh yeah, but there
Yes.
was real abuse as a child.
Yes, that's right.
So
Try the simple things
Yes.
first.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, better move on, I guess. Things going bump in the night are not necessarily apparitions. They could be pets bumping into the furniture, or
Like
someone's
on the
trying,
roof and see
or
the
someone
car.
trying to steal the same.
Or if it's very windy, you hear noises.
Seriously though, the question of most import is what lies beyond this veil of existence. Are ghosts real? Where does the Theosophical Society stand on this issue? Is life after death, like that portrayed in television shows such as Medium and Ghost Whisperer? Or is it totally different from both programs?
There you go. If you've got a defibrillator, I'll do an experiment.
Or is it...
Just set me after about 5 minutes.
No, we're going to do flatliner. Or is it like that portrayed in movies such as The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and Ghost? Now both are love stories. One transcends death, and both survive death. The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, for example, as you may remember, I don't know, it's a pretty old movie.
Yes.
For 1946, I think the movie was made, so a bit beyond your time.
Yeah.
But-
TV series in the 60s, wasn't
yeah,
it?
it was with what's her name? Not Carol. Long Hope. Hope Long.
Hope Lang.
Hope Lang.
Hope Lang.
Yes.
And what was the guy's name?
Oh, he was nice, the ghost.
I don't even
It wasn't he the guy from with David Hasselhoff in that car?
Oh, Night Rider.
Yeah, wasn't he the?
I don't know.
Because he had a similar look too. He had the beard and the.
All right.
And
I don't think I ever watched Night Rider.
But in any event, in the movie and the subsequent story, the ghost waited around for Mrs. Muir to die, and then he took her hand and took her away to wherever they went after they left that place. In Ghost, the movie with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore and Whoopi Goldberg, Patrick Swayze's character is murdered, and it turns out he's murdered because he stumbles across something where his friend turns out being a real so-and-so and causes the murder to happen. And then he tries to get on the good side of Demi Moore's character, and Ghost tries to get there on behalf of interacting between Whoopi Goldberg, who was a reluctant psychic who didn't know she was psychic, she thought she was just playing it for money, and eventually she had more ghosts than she could imagine, all coming around to her because she discovers that, or they discover that she can actually see them and hear them and whatever else. Well, the ghost Patrick Swayze takes her back to Demi Moore's character and tries to warn her about this friend of his who had caused his murder, and that this guy is ultimately evil. And between in this show, there is this kind of view that you have a moment when you're supposed to live and die, and when you die, you're supposed to go one of two places, either down there or up there. And when you're going up there, all these lights start coming down, and they're beautiful and that kind of stuff, and then you say, oh, it's time for me to go, and off I go. But when you're bad, like the murderer and all these type of things, you find that these black forces start to come towards you and start to try to drag you down, and in fact do. They catch you and they take you away into this nasty hellhole of a place. So you've got that kind of really kind of, I don't know, it's not dark reality, but it's a kind of maybe Christian values of heaven and hell type thing, as opposed to The Ghost of Mrs. Muir, which is just a lovely story about this couple that become a couple while he's a ghost and she's not, and then they both become a real couple when they both become ghosts and go off into the sunset. What's reality and where does Theosophy stand on this? Well, I suppose that's something that's a bit difficult to say as well, because as we know, Theosophy doesn't have, or supposedly doesn't have a dogma which says, this is what happens.
Yeah.
But it does suggest that there is something that happens, and the way that it happens is a certain long process where at the moment you die, your soul starts to withdraw from the body, and going through the different
Phases?
I'm thinking
yes,
bodies,
yes,
ethereal, from the...
This attaches from the physical, then the etheric, and then the emotional.
And in the process of doing so, it starts to shed its personality and that type of thing, so you then become the soul that you are, not the personality that you are in this life. If that's the case, then how can you ever meet up with friends and that type of stuff in an afterlife? That's something that personally I have a bit, I don't quite follow, but I'm not saying that's not right. It doesn't happen that way. It's just I don't quite understand how it is that, well, how can I recognise you? yeah. Oh, g'day, Tate, how are you? Well, who are you for a start? Oh, I'm your Uncle Fred. Are you? Yeah. You don't look like him. Well, I've changed. This is one of my different things, but it was like, when I think back to one of my other experiences, it was when one of my grandmothers passed away, and on the morning that she passed away, I'd actually experienced this out-of-body thing, and excuse me, I caught up with her as she was leaving the earth, and I said goodbye to her. How do I recognise her? Because I didn't see her looking like she did when she was alive. She didn't have her glasses on and didn't have a grey hair and that kind of stuff that I remember from when I physically saw her last. It was just this spirit thing. So perhaps that's it. Perhaps we have this ability to recognise simply by the tone of who we are.
Just trying to think about that, because when sometimes in life you meet somebody and you know them, but you've never met them before, and you start to sense that you've known them from another life. What is it that you recognise? Because it's not the physical that you're recognising, but there's a connection, a soul resonance of some sort, so that you do recognise it.
So there's some kind of recognition at a different level, where it's not actually looking at someone and saying, "Oh, well, I know that's Charmaine. I can see her. I know it's her." But it
So would it be like an emotive level that you recognise?
No, I think it's much deeper than that. I think it's at
It's
the
a
soul.
mystical level.
Yeah,
It's
the
at a
soul is
mystical
recognising
level.
the soul.
Yeah.
and I know it's a kind of difficult concept to come up with an idea that can be, which is why I think film is good, because it can kind of give you a visual clue to how things work and that kind of thing. Not necessarily true.
Sci-fi shows.
Sorry?
Sci-fi shows, like
Yeah.
they got one called Final Fantasy Spirits Within, about Gaia, like the spirits that are connected around Gaia, and but to see the realities of it, like to see why could there be reincarnation. Say, for example, if a person dies, the spirit lingers around. If a person is born, like that's why they have the spark of life. If like that soul could, if that like unfertilized piece of biological matter without any spirit, or that merges like a magnet. Like the magnet draws it in to this other being that's been born. That's how I can see like why reincarnation could be true. If it's all about random chance of the spirit going into that other body.
I don't think there's anything random at all.
No.
When you think of soul, and when we attach to physical, we've actually planned it a lifetime in advance before we actually go there to actually what we're going to try to experience in this life on Earth. Not to say that you're going to get everything you planned, because other souls are also planning what they want to do, and in some instances I think the bad can outweigh the good. If there are, evil forces around, not that I believe in evil forces, but people who, or personalities that are evil, and that those personalities may affect what could have been your long life as a soul, developing whatever it was, whether it was going to be a cure for cancer or whatever. You would plan to do that in your lifetime on Earth this time round, but because these other guys have decided to come in and stab you in the stomach and end your life 30 years prematurely, then that cure for cancer is not going to come around. So those people who had planned to cure cancer had been a part of that process of the curing of cancer in the next 30 years are now lost. Their goal has been lost in their soul mission, if you like.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, by this disposition of it.
My understanding is we're given particular karma to work out, plus dharma. I always think dharma is more important than karma. I think every life you have goals to try and achieve, but whether we achieve or not depends on how well we work with our karma and where we're sort of slotted in and what happens around us, because there's individual karma, there's family karma, there's national karma, there's racial karma. And we'll say a good example might be the Second World War, where millions died under various circumstances, both in the battlefield and in the concentration camps and in poverty, etc. that was caused. Now, all those souls that were at that time may have been drawn into that scenario, but it's the evil of someone like the Nazi regime that magnified that whole thing, and maybe a lot of people died before their allotted time during that life. But somewhere along the line it all balances up, because when you actually look at history, it's been a constant movement between the various dictators, the horrors were committed in the Middle Ages with the Inquisition and all that sort of thing. We carry on about Hitler, but Stalin killed many more people than Hitler.
20 million,
20
it's
million,
estimated.
you know what, yes.
Yep.
But then we also go on about him, but then what about Idi Amin?
Yes.
And
Pol
That's right,
Pol
Pol
Pot.
Pot.
You know,
And Mao Zedong,
Yeah.
he murdered millions in his regime.
yeah. So like
They wiped out all the intelligentsia of China.
we're very convenient in not thinking about those
Yeah.
because they don't affect European sensibilities.
Well, Hitler is a good caricature of an evil man. Though it wasn't just him, it was that group around him of Goering and...
Yes.
And his brown shirts.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for his brown shirts, he wouldn't have come to power.
Yes, yes, so that was a conglomerate, but he is like the arch evil caricature, and so therefore we can all focus on him as a...
Yeah.
But also, like, since life still goes on, like, it's kind of irrelevant if people live or die, or just die, because if that life still goes on, like, if there's enough in the world to sustain us, like, it doesn't really matter.
Well, it does in the long term, because how we live and do things affects the world. Places like Port Arthur, as we talked about at the beginning, are places of quite sadness and darkness, which can still affect the present, because this young fellow did the shooting only recent times, but what caused it was the darkness of about 200 years ago. So every time, the concentration camps of Europe, or the Stalins in Russia, have got horrific energies there. It'll take a long time for that to be dissipated. But opposite that, you'll have spiritual centres, like churches where there's been proper Christian values acted out, or a Buddhist temple, or a Hindu temple, or a mosque, wherever people are focused on good ideas. Recently, when I was in Indonesia with Jared, who's another TS member, on the Friday, the TS members in Bandung took him to a mosque to pray. And this is a boy that comes from a Catholic background, but is very much a Hindu in his personality. And he said the thing that he felt most empowered by was the sense of brotherhood. When they all went down and prayed together, and this incredible thought form was there of brotherhood.
Yeah.
And he walked away with that. So whenever we may see these places where there's darkness and evil, but there's also places where there's beauty and
Light.
uplifting thoughts and I mean, it can be a human structure, it can be in the middle of a waterfall or a beach or whatever. There's always counteracting.
Yes.
So it just is like
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. It's like the energies of the area, like when I talk about ley lines, about why why towns like go through problems and like financial problems because they're on this metaphysical ley line.
I don't think that
Yeah,
ley lines
yeah.
cause that. Ley lines are the energy fields of the earth. And priests of old knew how, or the Aboriginal elders, where they all knew how to use the energies of a ley line. The ley lines don't have good or evil or whatever, they're just the energy fields. What creates sort of bad or negative areas is because people have done something in that area at a certain time that's focused on the negative energies. Because there's always positive and negative energies moving all the time through everything. And certainly there's periods of time when one town or one city, 9/11 was a horrific time for New York, but it wasn't just the plane crash or the plane crashes that triggered up something. It was also the fact that thousands of people are still dying in New York of leukemia.
Yes.
Which was caused by the explosion of all the dust, the petrol, the aeroplane petrol, the chemicals, the fumes. You know, those great balls we saw of the dust, great storms that went down the street. John Algeo, who's ran for president last year, his wife is dying of leukemia, and she was in New York.
And a lot of them were the rescue workers as
The
well.
rescue workers,
That's
the
right.
firemen, the
Yeah.
different ones, a lot of them already died and are all
Yes,
dying
that's
of
right. Yeah.
either leukemia or related cancerous
Yeah.
or chemically related illnesses. So that's had a horrific effect on New York as a city. But it's interesting, New York itself has got its own vibrancy that seems to be, it's got past it.
Yeah.
Whereas other places, it lingers for a long time.
Yeah.
Talking of past it and lingering, we better wind up pretty soon. Now, in the late 19th and early 20th century, seances became fashionable. Now, of particular interest to me was that at the same time photography has become a useful tool to record such events. At such seances, photographs were taken of apparitions of varying subjects, from fairies to ghostly figures to ectoplasm, for example. Now, although some of the resultant photographs of apparitions were patently hoaxes, some on the other hand were difficult to disprove. Photographs of ectoplasm that looked suspiciously like cotton wool flowed throughout the picture frames. Now, here's, I don't know where all my books have gone, but I did have several that had examples of ectoplasm, but this is one that I found after searching through about 20 books. And it does look fairly fake as far as I'm concerned, but I don't know if you guys can see
Yeah, I
it.
can see.
I believe it.
I'll talk to them, the cameras.
It's in the book, I have to believe it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah.
But, some of the footage there that shown of things like ectoplasm shows it wrapped around people's legs and coming out all over the place, and you look at it and you go, oh, I don't know what it is. And why is it this ectoplasm that they've filmed has never really seemed to come to light since around about the 1930s. It's one of those things you just don't see anymore. And why not? Well, I personally think it's probably because it didn't exist in the first place, perhaps. Or, sorry, ectoplasm may exist, but what was filmed was certainly hoaxes. But when you see it, it goes around people's legs and it connects up to people's heads and it goes around the room. But according to Theosophy, the lower plane, the lower astral planes is one in. So what am I talking about? According to Theosophy, the lower astral plane is one in which most apparition activity is said to emanate. At death of the body, the soul is said to extricate itself from the lower self, as I've mentioned before, and move back through the less dense matter. A personality developed during a life on earth is said to shed from the soul shortly after death. Now, this may take some time depending on issues still to be learnt by the soul, and that could be days, months, and sometimes longer. Now, the day and hour of our passing are known, and that friends who have already passed over will meet us. Moreover, at death, we go not to a strange land, but to one which we have many times visited during sleep. Thus, at first, each one, whether soldier or civilian, guided by helpers, continues in familiar pursuits, good, bad, or indifferent as the case may be. That is, you could actually just continue on the life that you're living, except you're dead. Okay. Each for a time follows the avocations and seeks to keep up the habits of the earthly life. Now the second phase, or the next phase after that phase, is that of entry into a heaven of bliss and peace. The gradual withdrawal from the material towards the spiritual worlds, which which normally begins at death, culminates in entry into perfect happiness and fulfillment. And that comes from a book called Theosophy in a Nutshell, which is a South African Theosophical Society production, 1948. And that was from that collection of books and booklets that I got downloaded from that lady. I haven't added those up yet, but there's over booklets like this, there's probably about 50 or 60, and books, we've probably got about another 120 or so. So we've got quite a collection from it. But that's where I'll end it because I think we're running out of time.
Basically, the Theosophical ideas are that we withdraw stage by stage as the soul disconnects itself from each of its subtler bodies, from the physical. And that's where the angel of death comes in. The angel of death is not something terrible. It's one of the devas, or fairy, or not fairy, it's a deva, whose job is to help us disconnect from the physical and from the astral and from the mental, to eventually go into what's called David Chan, which I think is a Sanskrit word, David Chan, Sanskrit or Tibetan. But it's said that we can only take into David Chan the essence of the life we have lived.
So does that being the case, and if that's such a blissful state, do you believe in reincarnation?
Yes, yes, you're only there. It's said that whatever good things we do, or good thoughts, or good actions in this incarnation, the essence of that goes into us, it's there in the soul, and the soul can play with those ideas. You know, like if you've got, if you have desires to do good works in the world, to run around with Greenpeace or whatever, and you may fulfill it to a point, but you may have all sorts of ideas of doing things for the planet, but you never fulfill them. But the essence of that idea is there. In David Chan, you can play with those ideas, and they'll seem real, because maybe one sense they are more real than down here, who knows. But nothing negative can go into that state. But at the same time, it depends on the life we've lived. If we've lived a life that's very selfish, we haven't got much to play with when we're in David Chan.
So we've got to make it good?
Yeah. So the period of time, you can't. I can't put this.
Because we can't understand the concept of time, right?
Yes, even different theosophical writers won't actually give us time frames for all of this, because it seems that there are some people who incarnate fairly quickly. There's others that have 700 year cycles, and others that have a couple of 1,000 year cycles. It must depend on where the soul is at, on what our karmic connections are, what's going on planet Earth. If we're needed straight back, we'll be brought straight back because there's things to be done.
Where the soul lingers.
I don't know. At the same time, we have more people on planet Earth now, I think, than we've ever had, which means everybody's trying to incarnate. Not everybody. I think there's still a large percentage that aren't in incarnation at any one time. But nevertheless, we have an intensity of incarnation. One of the things that was said in the Hindu cycle, we're now in Kali Yuga. Now, a yuga means a cycle, and they've got the world divided up into these great cycles: the Golden Age and the Bronze Yuga and whatever. Kali Yuga means the black cycle.
Kali.
Kali as a goddess.
That's the goddess Kali.
Yes.
She could be vicious, that one.
But she can also have a good part.
Oh
too.
yes, I'm not saying she
Yes.
doesn't.
So
yeah.
that's how I see it.
Yes, well, I've read a prayer where it called on Kali to destroy all my bad faults and all my bad connections, etc.
Yeah.
So the goddesses or gods of destruction aren't necessarily evil, they're just...
No, but she's got a positive side too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But the Kali Yuga is, on one hand, is said to be the densest and heaviest part of the cycles, when there's greatest pressure. And people run around saying, oh, the world has got all these pressures on it, financially, materially,
Yeah.
so much more egotistical, etc., than what we used to be. Actually, the world is actually better than it used to be, but nevertheless, it is said there's this great pressure during Kali Yuga. And we're only 5,000 years into Kali Yuga. I think it lasts 400,000 years.
Yes. Oh yes, it's a long period
It's a
of
long,
time.
long period.
Yeah.
But having said that, it is actually the best time to be incarnation, because it's under pressure we evolve the quickest. So that it's like carbon becomes a plant goes into the soup and becomes oil in the rocks. Oil in the rocks becomes coal. Coal under pressure becomes diamond.
Yes, it does too.
So this is the best time to be incarnated, because the more pressure that's on us, the more we...
Can be turned into a diamond.
Diamond, yes. And it said this is the only time that the gates between the physical world and the superphysical worlds of the higher beings or higher states of consciousness are opened. Before then it's all focused down here, but now there's a turning up.
Yes.
So it's not really a bad time, but it will, to us, to our karma, will why me? Why am I going through all this?
It's actually, it's said to be an axial age that we're going through now.
Right now, yes.
And the last axial age was 400 BC.
Yes, 600 to 400 BC, yes. And I think it's a good period. We are actually getting better as human beings.
Yes.
I went to did I tell you about the film I went to see a little while ago? It was called Soldiers of Peace. I've got the DVD so we can watch it one day here. And it was made by Australians, interestingly enough. And it was an Australian war correspondent who spent all his life going around filming war. And in this film he goes around to all the places in the world where there's been violence of some sort. And he's worked with people who are doing things to create peace. And it's in all sorts of situations, from a young African girl who sets up a soccer game to counteract the elders making the tribal boys fight one another. She sets up soccer matches and they play with one another.
That's good.
One was at a school in Israel where the primary school kids are mixed
with Palestinians.
with Palestinians and Jewish children.
Yeah.
And these kids all love one another.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're working really well with having interaction and accepting the fact, okay, we've got different religions, but we like each other.
Yes.
And it looked at all sorts of circumstances around the world,
Yeah.
and interviewed people from Bob Geldof, who always gets into these things, to Desmond Tutu. And one person I was quite surprised was in it was Gareth Evans. I didn't realise how much work he's doing on the world peace thing.
Yes. Yes.
So it was a very interesting documentary, but they said in the process that despite all the media, we actually have less violence on planet Earth now than we have for the last 100 years.
It could be so.
And we get these wars like in Afghanistan that focused on the media, but there's always been wars. If you look back the last 100 years, it's just been constant.
Yes.
Rolling from one. I mean, there's been parts where there's been the two major wars,
Yeah.
but even the Vietnam War, the Falklands War,
Yeah,
the
that's
Pol
right.
Pot regime,
Yeah.
Vietnam, the Spanish Civil War, the Chinese War,
Korean War.
Korean War.
I met 2 Koreans at the observatory when I went to Sydney 2 days ago.
Oh,
2 young men, and we had a lovely talk.
oh,
One
right.
And
north,
they
one
were
south.
so outgoing, you
Yeah.
know, they're lovely young fellows, just in their early 20s. And he
Last
said,
month-
come to my country, it's a beautiful place.
Yes, I've heard.
Yeah.
When I was in Indonesia last month, well, Indonesia gets bad press in Australia.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that the Indonesians are all these Muslims waiting to take over Australia, etc. It's a
Yeah.
load of rubbish.
Well, I mean,
Apart from
maybe
the fact they were the most liberal Muslims
they are.
I've ever come across,
Yeah.
and there may be a few that are the fanatics, and
Yeah.
whatever, but the majority of the people are living worldly Western
Yeah, they are.
lifestyles.
Yeah.
I mean, the girls are walking around in short skirts and high heels, and
Yeah.
they all got their mobile phones and their ITs and whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And this you see in the city there. It's all not Western. It's the world scenario that's there now everywhere. But they were lovely people. It didn't matter where we went. And the TS in Bandung, I think the majority of the members were Muslim, and it's the first time I've been in a situation where you had a large Muslim Theosophical membership. And they were young. They were in their 20s and 30s. Arche was an eye doctor, another one was a teacher, another one was an architect, and they were practicing devoted Muslims, but Sufis, I should add.
Sufis, that's the difference. It is. It is really.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so therefore they were quite open to reincarnation and
yeah,
these
yeah.
sort of concepts.
And there's a lot of Hindu influence in Indonesia
Oh,
too.
of course there is,
And
yes.
that can sort of cut across a lot of that, you know, influence the mentalities there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the members was telling me that Sukarno, who's the one who sort of was the father of modern Indonesia, his father was a theosophist.
Really?
Yes. And the
Amazing.
father gave all his library to the TS Lodge.
Really?
Yes.
Well, isn't that interesting?
I know Sukarno had a lot of corruption, etc. in his regime, but he also had a lot of good ideas about uplifting the people, and
Yeah.
they actually have a strong policy of tolerance of all the religions. People, it's an actual policy. Yes, say whereas in Malaysia, which is strongly Muslim,
It's
and
almost Sharia.
it's also
almost.
nearly apartheid, because the Chinese and the Indians don't get jobs in Malaysia
No.
if there's a Malay.
If a Malay, and they're the laziest
Yes.
sods out, because I lived there for 2 years.
Oh, of course you did, yes.
Before we leave, you know that Jill is a new member.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
and I've been
congratulations.
waiting to see her because we've already given Philip Lloyd his package. So I want to congratulate you, Jill,
Yes,
and
welcome.
receive your package as a membership of the
Yes.
Theosophical Society.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Tony for speaking.
Yes,
If we give a round of applause.
Thank you for your talk, it was really good, as usual.
Now we go.